And we will torture these people in this today. So just again, real quick, distinguishing between product cost and period cost, and we're going to go through some of this. We're going to do, I've got another handout for you here.
Okay.
I think you were getting it the other day, it sounded like, but anyway, product cost associated with making the product, so anything that goes into that inventoriable cost is what we're talking about. And if you're a manufacturer, all you got, you're going to have direct labor, direct materials, and overhead. Everybody remember that? Hopefully you got that kind of down pat. And if you're a merchandiser, you just buy it, mark it up, and sell it. But you have to take care of your inventory either way. And those inventoriable costs are what we tried to stress the other day. I'm just going to run through these. Excuse me. Period costs are not considered product costs. We went through that quite a bit. Any questions on that? Administrative and selling costs, those are our period costs. They're expensed as they're incurred. Those are not part of the inventory cost.
I got a question.
Yes, sir.
So say like you have a building, and
you have what? Say
a building.
A building.
A building,
okay.
and you have tables and chairs. The tables and chairs we consider common cost, and the building itself is a period cost.
Is the building the building? That's a good question because we really haven't gotten that far yet. But if you have a building with a manufacturing plant in it, if the building is totally used for manufacturing, and that's all you do is manufacturing in that building, then that building will be depreciated. We went over depreciation a couple of weeks ago, and that depreciation will go into manufacturing overhead. Okay? So yes, it is a type of common cost because you could be making a lot of different products in that one building. And so they're sharing that building. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. So if we're building the tables in one room, building chairs in another room, building umbrellas in another room, they're all using that building, so that's part of your manufacturing overhead. Keep in mind that anything that's not direct labor or direct materials goes in that manufacturing overhead bucket, and then we're going to find out how we deal with that later on. But the table and chairs, yeah, that's a type of common cost if we're using that for our assembly line to make a product.
Are direct materials, are those like raw materials?
Direct materials are your raw materials, right?
Okay.
You know, picture a table, picture a chair, what goes in that?
Okay.
And anything that we can trace to that chair is considered a direct material. But we probably can't trace some of the glue that might be on there, or maybe some of the thread. It's just not normal to trace thread or something that minute, something that small. So we would throw that in the manufacturing overhead bucket.
Okay.
And we'll talk more about that as we go. And we went through all these. Hopefully you got those. If you need the answers to those again, let me know. Again, as I mentioned a minute ago, if you're a merchandiser, you buy the book, you mark it up, and you sell it. Hopefully that markup, that represents your gross profit, right? Your markup is your gross profit. Your sales price less your cost of goods sold basically is your markup. This is worth reviewing again quickly. For your merchandise inventory, again, if you're a merchandiser, all you do is pay the invoice price, freight in. Anything else that you incur to pay for that inventory goes into the cost of that inventory, and it goes to the balance sheet. I had the balance sheet up here on Wednesday, and we looked at the inventory, at the balance sheet, and then go on the cost of goods sold. So any cost of your inventory during the period or your beginning inventory, at the end of the period, either has to be on your income statement as cost of goods sold, or your ending inventory on the balance sheet. Okay? Ending inventory on the balance sheet. Oh, sorry. Here you go. Okay, I'll get it later. Don't worry about it. Anyway, you got your cost of goods sold inventory. This is also worth noting again, if you start with inventory for the beginning of the period, you add all your costs during the period, you get your goods available, subtract out what was there at the end, and that's what you sold. That's just basic logic. What'd you start with? What'd you add? What's left over? You didn't sell what was left over, right? It's still there. So the rest of it you must have sold. And it went from your inventory to your cost of goods sold on your income statement. Yeah, we're not worried about our stealing right now. But yeah, a lot of it does get stolen. If you're a manufacturer, direct materials, direct labor, and overhead, any materials that you can trace directly to a product, those are direct materials. Direct labor, if we're all working on the assembly line, if you're working on the assembly line for $10 an hour, with technology these days, we can trace how much time you spend on each table, each chair, each pair of tennis shoes, and the system would assign the cost of your labor to that pair of tennis shoes, or to that chair, or whatever it might be. And then factory overhead is everything else that relates to the factory. Everything else that relates to the factory, not the home office, but our manufacturing facility. And we went through these, if you need the answers. Did we go through those? We didn't.
No, we didn't
Oh,
go
we
through
did?
it.
Well, good, we'll do this. Give us something to do, right? The merchandising firm. That's when you buy your inventory and you mark it up and you sell it and you get rich. So a merchandising firm generates a profit when it blank the goods it resells. What do you add?
Freight out.
Now,
You're trying to generate a profit
You mark
when
it up, adds markup.
adds a markup, right? You're gonna add your markup. So that's worth repeating again. If you sell something for $10 and the cost of your inventory, cost of goods sold is 6, that means your gross profit, also called gross margin, is gonna be 4. Okay? You with me there? So, basically, if our cost of goods sold is 6 and we sell it for 10, that's a percentage, and also our gross profit is going to be 40% of $10. And of course, this is going to be 60% of $10. So what's the markup on cost? This is the markup on sales. Our sales is 100%. So basically, the markup as it relates to sales is 40%. But basically, when we do 4 over 6, of course, that's 66 or 2/3. 66.7. But the point to that is, your markup on cost is always going to be greater than your markup on sales, even though it's the same markup. It's $4. So it's going to be a different percentage. When we analyze an income statement, we always talk about everything on the income statement as a percentage of sales. So gross profit is 40%. That's the markup on sales. But your markup on cost will always be greater because your denominator is lower. So we mark that up 67% basically, or 2/3. I didn't really want to get into that. But anyway, the cost of goods sold for a merchandising firm is determined by doing what? Take a look at all of them, just don't shout out. You know this. Come on, Colin, answer. Get off the phone, let's go.
I have a question. Our cost of goods sold, is that like a wholesale price?
Is it what?
Is that like the same thing as like a wholesale price?
It just depends, right? It can't. That's where we start. If you're the end seller,
So I'm the guy. I'm buying bats at $6, selling them for 10. So I paid for $6 wholesale price.
right? Does everybody know what? Let's make sure everybody knows what a wholesale price is. The wholesale price is what you pay from your supplier. Then you mark it up. If you're the end user, if you're selling to the consumer, right? Sometimes you might not be, you're not selling to the end user. You got to sell to somebody. They might sell to somebody else. They might sell to somebody else before it gets to the final consumer, right? But yes, to answer your question, that is the cost of your bat. Now, does the cost of that bat include freight in, the purchase price, anything that you took to get that you paid to get that asset ready to sell it?
That's why you mark it up.
And then you mark that up. So we're marking this up 67%, aren't we? That's our markup, that's our cost, so we're marking it up 67%.
Are we doing that to cover those extra costs? Like,
Are we doing that to cover the extra cost?
No.
Talking to them. Yeah, what else is down here? What else is down there on your income statement?
Inventory, that's on the balance
Well, all of our other expenses, right?
sheet. Yeah.
Expenses, revenues.
This is our inventory expense. Everybody got that?
Okay, yeah. True.
Cost of goods sold is our inventory expense. We just don't call it that because we want to give it a special name because it's the largest number on your income statement usually, largest expense. So, you got all your other expenses right, Colin, you gotta cover all of your other expenses down here before net income can pop out. Before net income can pop out, our and the higher our gross profit, now look at this, the higher our gross profit, then the more likely we are to have net income, right? More likely. So the better you manage your inventory, the better your gross profit is, and hopefully the better your net income is. So the cost of goods sold for merchandising firm is determined by this basic logic. What do we do with this one?
C.
Beginning inventory plus purchases gives you your goods available. Take away your ending inventory because it didn't sell. It's still sitting on the shelves, right? Those tennis shoes you see and those hats you see when you walk into those cool hat stores, they haven't been sold yet. That's their inventory. Haven't been sold yet. But beginning inventory plus purchases less ending inventory gives us our cost of goods sold. The most significant cost for merchandiser is what?
Product cost.
That's our cost of goods sold, right? Our product cost, our inventoriable cost, is our cost of goods sold. Those are our product costs. And what gets in those product costs is our inventoriable costs. A typical merchandising firm has, now you're a merchandiser, think about your balance sheet. This is where your inventory lives.
Multiple.
Now, if you're a merchandiser,
So your person is supplying it, so
if you're a merchandiser, you don't have raw materials, you don't have work in process, and you don't have all that, and your finished goods.
Well, then the merchandisers, not the manufacturers.
Right, because anything a merchandiser buys is a finished good, right? It's finished. You're just marking it up and you're selling it. You're putting it on the shelf. You're just putting it on the shelf.
So which one is it?
one.
B?
One inventory
One
classification.
inventory classification.
One inventory classification. So, if you are a merchandiser, if you look on the balance sheet under current assets, you're going to have one inventory account. Now, if you're a manufacturer, you're going to have three different ones, which is probably on here too. It's been a while since I've seen this one. But anyway, a merchandising firm only has one. But if you're a manufacturer, you're going to have raw materials inventory.
Direct labor.
No. You're going to have work in process, right? And then you're going to have finished goods. So if you look on a balance sheet under current assets, and you see material inventory, work in progress, and finished goods, you know they're a manufacturer. You know that they manufacture products. So you've got raw materials, work in process, and finished goods. So you would have multiple. So that would be the reverse of that question. Which cost is not included as a necessary cost to complete the manufacturing?
C.
So does it take direct materials, direct labor, manufacturing? So that pops out. That is a period cost, right?
Correct.
Yep.
But you see all three of these attach themselves to it. Let's say this is a volleyball that you make. It has direct labor, direct materials, and overhead. So when you make this volleyball, the cost of that volleyball per unit is very important. And we need to know how much the labor was, the materials, and the overhead. So we know what to sell it for. Or at least, that's a start. Then you got to figure out the economy and your competitors and all that stuff. Until the product is sold, the cost to prepare merchandise for sale is part of what?
Merchandise inventory.
Everybody got that? Merchandise, it's setting on the balance sheet. Saying, hey, sell me, sell me. I'm here, buy me. Once you buy it, where does it go? It transfers to the income statement. You see, the balance sheet is a big holding pen. It's a big holding pen waiting for things to happen so those things can jump to the income statement. In this case, it's inventory. And when we sell that inventory, we accrued economic benefit. We sold it. And hopefully sold it for more than we paid for it. Hopefully. It doesn't always happen. People sell stuff for less than they pay for it sometimes, just to get rid of it. Raw materials costs that can be traced straight to a single unit of manufactured product.
See,
Raw materials, everybody got that? Direct material costs, that direct materials. Raw materials that can be traced to a single unit. That really depends on how sophisticated your accounting system is and how sophisticated your equipment is.
So what would overhead cost consist of? You said
What?
overhead.
Overhead costs, we're going to talk more about that, but this electricity, because we can't trace the electricity to each chair that we make,
Okay.
so we estimate it. So anything that's not direct labor, direct materials, goes in the manufacturing overhead
and
budget.
like the security guard,
What else did we talk about? The people that come in behind and clean up after we go home, right?
yeah.
That's manufacturing. My salary, if I'm the supervisor, I'm not working on the material, I'm not working on the product, but I'm here, I've got to make sure you're here, make sure you're working hard, schedule you, you know, go out, I'll spend more time in the stock room probably, but my salary would be manufacturing overhead. My salary would be manufacturing overhead. And just mentioned this a moment ago. If you are manufacturing, you've got raw materials, work in process, and finished goods. We're going to talk more about that here. Work in process is the hardest one to understand, but we are going to be so enlightened today. Okay? Here's your manufacturing overhead. Wait a minute. Indirect material, I'm just figuring out direct material. And indirect labor, direct labor. Well, the indirect labor would be, an example of that would be the security guards, right? Not the security guards for the home office. The security guards for the manufacturing facility. The cleanup people that come in behind us would be a type of indirect labor. Okay? Would be a type of indirect labor.
This is not affecting the product.
Directly, right. It's not affecting the product directly. Well, what about if we got a person, you know, all you guys have your own assignments to make these tables. You know, we start here and we go around and make tables or chairs or tennis shoes. You all know what you do. You do a good job of it. Well, what about if we had a couple of people that just bounced around? They just bounce around and help everybody that needs help. Or maybe they bring the material, they grab the materials and bring them in. So that they're kind of our assistants, right? They're our assistants walking around helping us. They do whatever we need them to do. So that labor cannot be traced to a particular pair of tennis shoes. That would be an example of indirect labor.
What about the guy, the manager who oversees it all? Is
Exactly.
that indirect labor?
Exactly. My supervisor's salary would be an example of indirect labor. The problem with all this stuff, the same cost can be categorized several different ways. But that's just the way it is, and there are reasons for that. Now, our other overhead cost would be, again, just a good review, the security guard, just for our facility, the cleanup people that come behind us, our assistant we were talking about. My salary supervisor would be an overhead. So anything like that would be overhead. Now, see, all of these are part of overhead. Indirect material and indirect labor is part of manufacturing overhead. So again, picture a big bucket, and on that bucket, the front of it says manufacturing overhead. If it has anything to do with our manufacturing facility, that's not direct labor, direct materials, think. Well, it has to do with manufacturing, but it's not direct labor, direct materials. Well, I'm just going to throw that right in that overhead bucket. I'm going to dunk it. I'm going to slam dunk it right in that overhead bucket. And then we are going to assign it to the cost of the product. And that's when it gets real exciting. So, okay. If we have direct materials inventory, we've got a pile of stuff. Let's picture a big warehouse with piles of stuff everywhere. And you have a certain amount on the first day of the period. You got a big pile of stuff. Well, let's do this. Let's back up. Let's say these are our raw materials. This table is the only one we have when we start the month. Then during the month we bring in all these tables, and these are our raw materials. Just go with me here. So that was our first one. We added these during the month. So those are our goods available, right? Those are our goods available. Direct materials available. Okay, at the end of the period, we've only got 2 of them left. All the rest of them have been gone. Well, we know how much we had total. If we back out 2 tables that are still here, that tells us the materials we must have used. So what did you start with? What did you add? Take away what's still there, and that's what you used. And you will see several questions on your test just testing that logic. We can do that. Don't miss that. Don't miss those questions. What, no sound effect? Oh, there it is. Okay, here's the flow. Man, you guys, we're all visual learners these days, right? Visualize this. Raw material purchases. Now, if those raw materials are used directly in the product, those are direct materials, right? If some of those are not used for, if some of those materials are used for manufacturing overhead, those are going to go to manufacturing overhead. But right here, it's going to work in process. So think of an account called work in process. You're going to dream about this. WIP, work in process. So those are direct material costs. Direct material costs. Any of the materials that we did not use are going to be where at the end of the period? On our balance sheet. So the material costs we incur either have to be on the income statement as part of cost of goods sold, because it's going to be in direct material work in process, or it's going to be on the balance sheet. So any inventory we don't sell, which is raw materials, it's going to be on the balance sheet. Any raw materials that we use that are not directly traceable to our tables are going to go into manufacturing overhead as indirect materials. They're going to go to manufacturing overhead as indirect materials. So you're compiling manufacturing overhead, you're compiling indirect materials. So questions on materials, you see the flow. Picture a big pile of whatever you want to picture. When you buy that at the end of the period, you're either going to have used that in work in process, or it's going to go to manufacturing overhead indirect materials, and if we did not use it, then it lives on the balance sheet at the end of the period. Don't forget about your balance sheet. It's our friend. It's where our assets, liabilities, and stockholders' equity lives. And inventory is an asset. It has future economic benefits. All right, this is pretty, not all-inclusive, but it does a nice job. If you know these, you should do fine on the test. But our manufacturing overhead, indirect materials, indirect labor, factory rent, depreciation, factory taxes, factory insurance, and any other things like utilities. So that's a fairly good one, but again, utilities or anything else. But the key is, and I'll trick you on the test. I love to trick you on the test. That's my life's goal, right? I know I don't have much of a life. But I will say depreciation on the selling equipment. Depreciation on the selling equipment doesn't live here, does it? Only depreciation on the manufacturing equipment. I will ask you about insurance for the home office. Insurance for the home office is an administrative cost, and that's a period cost, right? It has to be insurance on the factory. So it has to relate to manufacturing before it ends up in this bucket. Insurance, security, all that fun stuff. Depreciation, rent. So our direct labor costs. Now direct labor, thank goodness we can't stock direct labor like we do inventory. We can buy inventory and store it, right? I mean, this cup it can be inventory and it's waiting to be sold at the bookstore. I can store that. You can't store labor, can you? Oh, here, well, I'm waiting to be used. I mean, you don't store labor, so direct labor is easy for our purposes. The problem's either going to tell you, here's direct labor that went directly into the product, or it went into manufacturing overhead as indirect labor. So labor can be either direct or indirect, but you can't stockpile it. You can't have beginning labor, add labor, take away labor, right? Can't do that. Labor can't do that. You got that? But you can do that with physical things. Physical things, you can do that. So work in process. So work in process is going to have our direct materials. our direct labor, and manufacturing overhead. So you're starting to see the flow in your brain, starting to burn it in there. Feels good, doesn't it? It feels good. Okay, work in process, direct materials, direct labor, and overhead. Basically, when a job gets done in work in process, when it gets finished, it's taken out and it goes to finished goods. And that stays in finished goods on the balance sheet because it hasn't been sold yet. It may never sell. Hopefully it will, but it may never sell. But it sits there until it's sold or if somebody steals it. Well, what about if you didn't get finished with the job? At the end of the period, it's going to be in work in process. And that work in process at the end of the period will have direct materials, direct labor, and overhead. And that's going to be on the balance sheet, and that will be on the balance sheet. Both of those are on the balance sheet because you haven't sold them yet. Both of them will be on the balance sheet because you have not sold them yet. So your finished goods inventory. Picture a warehouse full of tennis shoes. And those tennis shoes are going to be sent out to the retail stores. Well, they haven't been sent out yet and they're finished. So anything that's still there is going to be on your balance sheet and finished goods inventory. But anything you sold during the period is going to be on the income statement as cost of goods sold. So the total cost of our finished goods either is going to be on the balance sheet or it's going to be on the income statement as cost of goods sold.
Question.
Go ahead, I'm going to stop this and start it over because that last file was way too long.